Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another one of our alumni webinars. We are so excited this evening to have a very, very special guest with us, Urushi Raina. She has got lots to share with you. She has got her feet in two fields, one very unexpectedly, and that's in the humanities and now in the sciences. I would just like everybody to see her face. So to Urushi Raina, the class of 2009, welcome. We are so excited to have you here. So say hello.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to meet you. Thank you for having me, everyone, at Crawford. It's been a while, but I'm just so excited to kind of chat to everyone and share a little bit.
Awesome. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Urushi. Urushi has lived in 7 countries on 4 continents, so is incredibly well traveled and has gained a lot of experience and insight from her journeys across the globe. She was born in India, raised mostly in South Africa, and attributes her fearlessness to being an outsider. And so after school, Urushi decided to study a BA in economics and English literature, which is why we're also excited to hear about this experience she had at Vassar College in New York State. And then she made what she describes as an audacious cold call to a fellow alumna and got introduced to a very different world, and started working in Vancouver and was offered a position there and started working on large projects in the health sector, including helping project manage a clinical plan for a $1 billion capital redevelopment at St. Paul's Hospital. In 2018, she completed her MBA at Richard Ivey School of Business at the University of Western Ontario. She then returned to Vancouver to launch a consulting firm, and through that business, she landed her current position last summer, and she is the program manager of the Spinal Cord Injury Accelerate Division at the Praxis Spinal Cord Institute, based near Vancouver. And she says in her own words, and I'm sure she'll let us know, that she's fallen in love with healthcare. It's extremely atypical. You're dealing with very human and political problems. And she's working on the world's first business accelerator for SCI technologies. And in amongst her studying and her working program, she is also a published author. Her first novel, When Morning Comes, is a young adult work published by Vancouver's Tradewind Books in 2016 and follows 4 youngsters living in Johannesburg during apartheid. And we were fortunate to have Urushi come visit us a few years ago. I've got a very my own copy of an author signed book in my book collection. And in fact, my son has just read it as one of his English choice books. So Urushi, it is just so exciting to have you here. I am thrilled of what you are going to be able to share with us. Being an author at such a young age, working on your second book, just talks to the testament of the amazing human being that you are. And we are so thrilled to call you a Crawford alumna. So welcome, and I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks so much for having me and that introduction. Luckily, you can't see me blush with the video, and that's the pro of being Indian. You can kind of hide your blush, but every now and again, I get embarrassed. So it means so much, Miss Perkis, and I still call you Miss Perkis because you're still hardwired in that school environment to get such an introduction and to share with you guys. Just a quick question. I see 0 attendees on my side. Is that normal? Just want to check. That's okay. Okay, perfect. So I'll continue. I just want to, I'm happy to talk into the vacuum, but it's so different from when I was there in 2018 and I actually got to come in class and sit in assembly. So maybe what I'll do is, because there are 2 kind of sections to this, is maybe I'll talk a little bit about what I do in my day job. Well, what should I do first? Day job or writing job? Maybe I'll do the writing job first, and then I'll talk a little bit about the day job. And I know we're in the humanities stream, so I'll try and bring it back to, subject choice and how, the stuff I did at Crawford really helped shape quite an unexpected journey in a few ways. So maybe, yeah, I'll talk a little bit about my writing. So When Morning Comes it's a book here, and as Ms. Perkins mentioned, I was given this amazing opportunity to tour the book around in Johannesburg. Go back to the school where I graduated just 9 years before and talk about the book coming out. I got to go on SABC and ETV. So, growing up watching, ETV or SABC in grade 1 or 2, then having the chance to present that book in that forum was just incredible. But what got me there? And what got me there was at the age of 16, deciding to write a novel, but I didn't know how to write one. And some of my classmates remember I would carry around literally, I think 1 week I was carrying around just like pages and pages in a plastic folder, about 80,000 words. I was carting that around class with me. And as you could imagine, when you're 16, carting around 200 pages of text, it's not something you volunteer to do. It's not something you're quite as proud of, especially when my first attempt was really bad. It was really not very good. And I think that opportunity to just, I call it peak sucking at a young age, or doing the worst work you'll ever do as early as possible, is one of the biggest pieces that led me to being a writer, and being okay with not getting it right the first time. I think in a culture of Crawford, there's a lot of academic excellence. I think what's also amazing at Crawford growing up there was that there are so many different ways you can excel, whether that's extracurricular, whether that's through some of the subjects. And I think really exploiting that and finding your unique voice among quite a competitive environment was the biggest piece for me. Because I think you can excel in so many different ways, and you need to give yourself the opportunity to do that. Maybe what I'll do is I'll read a portion of the book, and I'll talk a little bit about it. It's set in 1976 in Johannesburg, as Ms. Perkins mentioned. And as you know, in the history curriculum, the Soweto Uprising is covered, I think, in grade 9. And I don't know with IB things have changed, but grade 9 and then again in grade 11. And so my first exposure to the Soweto Uprising was through very early historical textbooks, because back then, it was 2009, that we were just coming up with the first post-apartheid textbooks, and the teachers were trying to learn how to teach this very difficult material. And we were getting exposed to what had happened so recently in our past, but really not in our past. There are individuals in our generation who went through the Soweto Uprising in different angles, and tried to make sense of it. And I remember an essay Mr. McMahon made us write about the Soweto Uprising that I haven't forgotten, and that ability to see things from different angles, to look at source material and then interpret from a photograph or a paragraph of a quote. What does that mean? What could it mean? What could be different meanings for it? Was a very, was in the history curriculum, but the way we were taught it was, I think, really, top notch. And, when I went later into other very competitive schooling environments, that comprehension skill, that focus on being able to make a logical flow of argument was, in with the best schools that I at least encountered. And sometimes I had a bit of an edge, because not only in English and history, but in so many other aspects, we were given so much, like expectation, but also opportunity to articulate ourselves. So I think that Crawford's emphasis on working on being articulate, even if it's not your favorite thing, is quite phenomenal, and being articulate both in writing and in how you speak. So this book, as I mentioned, is set in that time, and there are 4 characters. Zanele grows up in, she actually goes to Morris Isaacson School, which is an existing school in Soweto, and she's sort of just coming to terms with kind of what it is to be a young Black woman with limited options in 1976 South Africa and not accepting it. You know, she doesn't want to accept the status quo. She's also a very terrible jazz singer. And her friend is actually his name is Tabo, and he's down here. And he's left school because he didn't see any options for him there. What was keeping him there? The quality of the schooling, even today, is quite unequal, but back then was institutionalized to be unequal. So he left school and he's being a tsotsi. He's, figure out a way to earn the money he wants to do the things he wants to do. But he's so fond of Zanele, and they have that kind of push and pull of a friendship. Then we had Mina, who is over here, and Mina is South African Indian, and she's growing up, I played with the stereotype of the Indians being the shopkeepers, because that was one of the things that in the Indian community, we weren't like encouraged to be doctors, right? But we were given more rights and opportunities than Black people. So I was playing with the cliche of her managing her dad's shop, but really wanting to be a doctor. And, being a young South African Indian girl, also being very inquisitive about the world around her, about the racial injustice and how she makes sense of that, but not being Black, not experiencing that level of racism, but knowing racism really well. And then lastly, we have Jack. And Jack grows up in Houghton, and he grows up, he goes to Jeppe, Jeppe School for Boys. I think I visited that for a debate tournament. So all these venues are very real to me, even if set in the past. And he's sort of, off to go to Oxford. He has a great, very, high class life. And suddenly, through a chance encounters, he's forced to kind of encounter the discomfort of living in an apartheid state, and then through discomfort, really confront the brutality of the apartheid system. So I'm going to read maybe two small sections, less than a minute, just to give you a sense of and what the book's like. So this is from Jack's point of view, the boy growing up in Houghton, and this is the prologue. I dream of Zanele at the wheel, her knuckles and face outlined by street lights. We speed past vacant lots. She's driving too fast. Rain comes thick and heavy on the windows. It's the kind of storm that happens only on the Highveld, the thunder loud and rapid. She doesn't speak. I need her to. Maybe she's counting the people who've died since we first met. I calculate how fast the storm is coming up behind us, as if that helps. Zanele is taking us somewhere only she knows. The things I'm good at, lying and mathematics, are useless now. In the moments before the end, I can do nothing. We crash into the highway railing, the front chassis crumpling into the windscreen. Another scandal. A Black girl and a white boy found in a car with no explanation besides the obvious one. And then I'm going to read a bit from Zanele. Let's see. Okay, so this is right on the day of the Soweto Uprising, June 16th. And what was so cool about writing about this was how many primary resources, so going back to history, accounts there were of the day of school children when suddenly this protest started. So I took about 10, 15, 20 first person accounts, like, going back to my history, a subject I took, and try to piece together, yes, it's fiction, but I was very careful when you're writing fiction with this level of violence, with this level of discomfort, that it's based on reality. So it rings true. You're not doing gratuitous violence or gratuitous sort of things that didn't happen. So this is Zanele on the day of the uprising. When we came to the bridge, we started tripping over each other. The placards ahead of me stopped, even though this was not a stop that we had planned, even though there didn't seem to be any cars blocking our way. A hiss went through the crowd, which became a word that traveled down to me. Police. I lost Vusi as he ran ahead to find out if it was true. I didn't see Vusi ever again. Up ahead, Masi climbed up on the back of a truck. We are not going to fight them, he said. Just be calm. Police. Minutes passed and they didn't come. We started pushing each other, trying to go forward. Winston, the boy from Naledi, shouted, "Where's your police, huh, Masi?" A laugh went through the crowd. Then we heard the sirens, the sound of rubber scraping road, 3 vans and 4 police cars. They formed into a line. The policemen got out in khaki with their dogs. The dogs, like their handlers, formed still shadows in the afternoon light. It was their thick bodies, their dogs and their cars between Orlando Stadium and us. I elbowed students to get to the front, crushing placards under my feet. We came closer and closer to them. "Stand back!" a policeman shouted through a loudspeaker. He was middle-aged with thick lines under his eyes and near his mouth. He tried it again in Zulu. "Kahleni," then added. He was serious. I laughed at his attempt at Zulu. Some of the kids behind me started laughing too. The dogs strained on their leashes. Still, we came closer. The line of policemen looked like it was going to break. A policeman with a child's face and a thin red beard stood opposite me, his fingers adjusting and readjusting on his gun. In a few seconds, I would be at his throat. Then one of them threw something into the crowd, tossing it high above my head. Tear gas. Still, we came at them. A dog came loose from a leash and charged at us. Someone took a rock and threw it at the dog, and then others did too. That's when the policeman with the red beard decided to shoot. Someone shouted, and then we were all shouting. We found stones near our feet and threw them. More shots. We scattered far and wide into side streets, slamming into shop fronts. As I ran, I found small hands, and so I dragged them with me into an opening between 2 shops. I pressed their heads into the ground as more shots rang out. Students kept throwing stones. "Stop throwing," I screamed. Stop throwing. My voice was gone, broken. A boy fell in front of me. Someone picked him up. Still, the shots came. The boy was picked up by my friend. His blood fell onto the ground. A girl ran next to him, crying. The children watched me with their large eyes. I had not expected them to shoot us. I did not. The violence took me back to the first days of drawing up plans with Billy, plans to bomb the tower, back through all that had happened up to this moment. I gripped the children's small bodies closer to me, the smoke, sweat, and the acrid taste of tear gas in my throat. So that's a little sample of the book. So, when I want to talk a little bit about subject choices maybe, and like I talked a little bit of history, how that came in play. And I was always very passionate about the humanities. So English was my favorite subject for a long time. But one thing I will say, and this leads to some of the day job work I do, is I really encourage students and parents at this age and this stage to do as wide a group of subjects as you can, even if you love the humanities, partly because you don't know what's going to come next. And I think to be truly good at humanities, you really need to have a lens of the world that's as complex, as diverse as possible. So in my matric subjects, I had English, history, drama, but then I also did science. Obviously had math and all these other pieces, and I pursued science like doggedly. I ended up, I initially did quite poorly, and then I think I came top, I think the best in the district, but I started off in grade 10 with a C or something in one test, and I was like, science is not for me, and then I ended up, I think, in the district getting the top mark. So I think that perseverance and grappling with subjects that are, maybe you don't like them, but this high school is such a great opportunity to try stuff that you may not love, because at least you'll have a backgrounding on different disciplines that govern our world. And as Ms. Perkins pointed out later on, with not much background, but a few things here and there, I ended up working in health sciences. So you just never know how things are going to shift. One of the other choices I made in subjects that was kind of unexpected, and a lot of people were like, why are you doing this, was in grade 10, I dropped ad maths and I took drama. So I was going to drama in grade 11 without being a drama kid ever before. I didn't do drama before. I did debate and I did public speaking, but I never did drama. And drama is so different because you have to put your emotions on the stage, whereas debate, I love debate, but debate was making other people look silly, which I did way too well as a teenager, and I had to tone down. It was a bit of a problem, but that was a kind of an interesting choice because, you know, at the end of the day in college, I needed to take ad maths calculus for my economics degree. So I needed the ad maths. But I remember, I don't know how it happened, but I was like, you know, should I take drama? And my parents were like, why not? And my dad is an engineer. And also did math at a very high level, right? My brother, as Ms. Perkis knows, actually ended up doing honors math, came top 2 in his program at UBC. So math was something really important to my family. But both my parents, when I just brought it up randomly, and I was not confident about being in drama, but I said, should I do that? Everyone was like, why not? And I remember one thing my dad said, he was like, you know, the things that drama are going to teach you at this age, maybe more than what maths can teach you at this age. And maths is there, it's waiting for you. And of course, everyone wants your kid to do ad maths. But I thought that shifting even in a year later into a subject, I had no years, I was not in the main plays chosen, I wasn't a drama kid, is one of the best decisions I made. And this is why. Because in the business world and in the humanities world, being able to put yourself out there and really, like I said, not just debate with people, but really share a bit of yourself with people, especially in the business world when you're negotiating, is one of the most powerful skills that you could have that rank right up with ad maths or science or anything else. So I think I really appreciated the freedom and the opportunities at Crawford that I could do that switch, and then what a dramatic impact it had on my life to be able to do drama. I mean, even as a writer, now I go around and I have to do all these readings, and a lot of writers are big time introverts, and you know, you go in front of 1,000 students and they're teenagers and they're going to get bored. And I can't see you in teams, but I know I was a fidgety in assembly. I'd always sit at the back in a hoodie and try to, like, you know, pretend like I'm not participating. So I have no, you know, I know I was like that. So I'm like, how do you entertain teenagers? And that's where drama came in, because you can't just be a good writer. You have to make the words mean something. You have to make people feel something. So that's one choice I was really grateful for, even though it meant extra calculus and linear algebra when I was in college, but it worked out fine. So yeah, I really encourage you to make the daring choices in your subjects. I really want to talk about, you know, subjects, you know, that Crawford does really well and the schooling system does really well are those subjects that force you to articulate yourself in different mediums. And I do think it's really stood me well at every competitive academic level I've been in. And it again differentiates yourself. So I remember in grade 4, I was not the person I was today. I was very shy. And I moved from Crawford to grade 5, from Crawford to Nigeria for 2 years. So I came back and forth a few times. And in Crawford, I was in the loudmouth. And in the American school in Nigeria, for the first day, they asked me to introduce myself. And I was like, oh, here we are. We had to do those very, you know, like annoying speeches, even as early as grade 4 in the Crawford system. And I just introduced myself to the class, and the teachers in the American school were completely surprised. They're like, how do you know how to speak like that? I'm like, you haven't even seen the top public speakers in my school. So, you know, these types of skills really were quite fantastic. And you know, I was making fun of debate, but I think all the extracurriculars you get to do at Crawford are also amazing, and they're all in one place. You know, other people are still doing that, where parents are carting their kids to soccer here and there. But the fact that in Crawford, as a school with all these amenities, I tried basketball for a year, I did netball, I did tennis for a while, and I'm not a sportsy person, but I got so much exposure to different sports because it was practice right after school right there. So I didn't have to have a debate with my parents to drive me anywhere. I could just show up, go to do the extracurricular activity. I did Interact, and you know, Interact was, it's interesting, you know, growing up in South Africa and growing up in Canada where we have Indigenous issues, is Interact actually, you know, kind of was one of the first experiences of how do you deliver impact meaningfully. And the fact is, you know, I learned that there were a lot of things I wouldn't want to do. I don't want to do episodic impact where I'm just coming in, delivering something and leaving. That is not for me impact. And it was very influential in the decisions I made post my MBA, in my day job of working for a charity, working with people with disabilities, working for innovation for people with disabilities. I spend hours and hours and years on that. I don't want to come in and out and deliver some objects, because I don't know, for me, that's what delivering impact is, because you really need to understand the community you're serving to actually have an impact. So that's kind of my experience of how Crawford shaped me. So I'll talk a little bit, and I'd love to hear any questions. But I want to talk a little bit about my day job. So as Ms. Hook has mentioned, I did an arts degree at Vassar, and a little bit before that, I actually got into WITS, and I actually attended WITS for a year. Because I didn't know if I'd go into the US, and I was on a scholarship. I got, I think, a national scholarship, and I remember, and this is a very humanities experience, all the kids in that national scholarship, there were 4 other kids or 3 other kids, all the dean of faculties from WITS came, and actually Miss Reese came with me, but the science faculty, the math faculty, and then they didn't bring up anyone from arts, even though I was planning to do a BA in WITS. And they told me, well, people with these grades don't usually go to humanities. And that was such an interesting moment for me, because, you have to stop and go, why is there this perception of humanities, even in the academic space? And, I'd walk into the WITS classroom and they'd say, BA, bugger all, or whatever they would say, and you just have to laugh it off. And everyone is going through this process of how do you actually make a living and do something you're passionate about, and it's not easy. And very early, I knew I'm not going to make enough money with just writing. So I want to be very honest about that. However, the opportunity, even at WITS for that year, we did philosophy and we did English. It was such an incredible curriculum, even in WITS, and then going into Vassar and getting to write my novel as my final thesis in the last year, the novel that I read. No one can take that experience away from me as a humanities student. And I know that now, because I've got a little bit of the economics, when I went into the career realm, and I went into an MBA with 75% engineers, no offense, engineers, we love engineers, but I differentiated myself on so many levels, because I can work with engineers quite well, being a healthcare consultant, but the EQ, the ability to kind of pull together a 10-page report in a day to brief the deputy minister, those are skills that I think have led me to progress in my career very, very quickly. So, I think taking those risks, so I kind of went in for business for myself, I consulted for myself, and then being okay to step away from the mainstream lawyer, doctor piece, which was challenging. Even from, grade 12, I was being told by people who don't know me, oh, you have these grades, why are you doing a BA? And finding a path that, allows me to have meaningful impact over years, but using a lot of analytical skills, because I'm always looking at the financials of the startups I'm supporting. I'm always looking at how we measure impact. I'm managing right now a 10 million Rand budget. I'm actually now moved to director of my position. So how do you lead and look like, I look very young for my age. So when I went to Crawford last time, some people confuse me for the high school students. So how do you look very young and as a woman and a woman of color, which these issues are in Canada as well, and you're sitting at a director level with people who are 50 and 60, and they're going, why is she here? And why she has a funny accent. So all of these pieces are all about how do you get there and how do you stay there, is taking risks, being resilient with the knocks, go in with that, getting that C in a subject. It's okay. You'll work yourself up. This is such an opportunity in high school to fail a little bit and then build and build. And then you've proved to yourself as an adult, I was in a startup before this role, and the startup didn't work out. But you didn't lose complete confidence in yourself. You're like, it happens. Now let's build on top of that. What's the next adventure? So, I'm in this very lucky spot where I love what I do, both in my spare time and in my day job. I get to always challenge myself. My only complaint is there's not enough hours in the day. And even then, being exposed to Crawford and actually having to do some sport, compared to a lot of people who work the amount I do and do all these arts, I'm probably relatively healthy, because I know, being a South African, you have to go kick yourself out at 4 p.m. and do some physical exercise. So yeah, I think, these years were very formative to me. And I'm just very grateful to be where I am now, and hope to visit Johannesburg very, very soon. So I don't know if I can pause there and if there are any questions, but I'll hand it over back to you, Ms. Purkis.
Excellent. Thank you, Urushi. A very interesting journey that you've taken, and yes, to be a director at your young age just talks to the fact that people all over the world can recognize potential when they see it. So a question from me is you know, I think that a lot of young people look at success in other people and think that it's instantaneous, and you're a published author and that's what I want to be. But they seem to, you know, forget about the struggles and the disappointments, and I just would like to know how, you know, how did you go to your first publisher and they say, I love your book, or how many, you know, times do you submit? Because like playwriting and script writing and book writing, you've got to find the publisher that connects to your soul and wants to share your story. So did you have any heartbreaking moments?
Oh, absolutely. So a lot of times, because I got published when I was 26, so people would go up to me and be like, oh, you just got published, you're so lucky. And in my head, I've been like, I have been trying to churn out a novel, different novels. I have 5 unpublished, almost full-length manuscripts sitting at home since I was 16. Okay, so at 16, when I finished at the end of 16, maybe early 17, I submitted my book in big brown envelopes to the States from South Africa, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I got 10 rejections back, you know, very form rejections. You know, like they're talking to a 16-year-old, like, hello, Urushi, this is, you know, like just, and you sit there. And I think what I gave myself freedom at 16 is I didn't think I'd get instantaneous success because I was reading so much about writing. And I was like, what have I got to lose? This is one of my biggest, like, even when I went into business for myself a few years ago, I go, what have I got to lose but my dignity? And it's a joke because you don't even lose your dignity by actually failing, but like you get the form rejections, and I did, and it actually didn't knock me down, but you know, I got rejected, and it's not great, but it didn't knock me down because I didn't expect it to be overnight. And then I think because I read all these stories of authors taking their time and taking years, I just made a rule. It's like, have I given it everything I have? And I think a lot of mistakes that writers do, or artists, is they wait for the thing to be perfect. So they write for 10 years, but they never submit and get the feedback. And I really encourage you, it's okay if someone tells you your story doesn't work. So it's nothing about who you are as a person. It's just that your story doesn't work. Even today, you know, the other day I was writing something, I was like, oh, I just wrote a really bad paragraph. That's like horrible. And you just laugh about it because what you create in the moment is not who you are. So the more you can divide those two things from yourself and say, I'm going to put myself out there, I'm going to get the feedback, and I've never arrived. We keep arriving every day. You keep improving every day. I think that attitude is great. But I honestly think debate helped me a lot. So because in debate, you get like, you know, especially with high school kids, you know, people are really brutal. Like you'll say something and people will straight up, within not using cuss words, try to make you look stupid, and they will succeed. And I think being a debater writer, because, you know, debate was a big part of my life then, really helped because I was used to, and I was a summator, so I don't know if they still do British parliamentary, but I was a summator, so I was the most aggressive role, and usually the boys would be against me, and I'd be, you know, little me versus, you know, these burly boys, and then you say something, and then you get the most, you know, pretty hard retorts or your critiques on your argument. And you have to be okay, because guess what? You're speaking next, and you have to get up with a response. You can't get upset about it. You need to be focused on what's your response. And I think that skill of not getting emotionally attached if someone is critiquing something you're saying or doing, and you're just like, okay, I'm going to take this feedback, I'm going to get better, really helped as a writer. So I remember one time I was talking to my writer friends. I'm like, you know, the issue is you guys haven't been debaters and you haven't worked in the business world, because you get so much negative feedback on the daily that it's not even negative, it's constructive, and you sort of go, okay, this is what they said doesn't reflect me and my worth as a person. It just reflects the situation or this piece of writing, or maybe it's just them having a bad mood. You know, sometimes publisher hasn't eaten and you've submitted something and they're like, I don't like this. I know I've done the same thing where I don't, you know, I'm hungry and I don't think clearly. So it took a long time. It took me 10 years of submitting and getting rejections. I ended up finding a home with someone I'd interned with as a editing assistant many years ago. They were a diverse publishing house, and they took the time, but even, you know, they read something earlier I'd written like 2 years earlier, and they didn't like it at all. So even with them, they didn't fall in love immediately. It took some time to get them to really like the work I was doing and the right project. So, you know, what I would say is pace yourself. Who do you want to be in 10 years? Have that view and go, what can I do now? And that usually is putting yourself out there, not being afraid to make mistakes, because the sooner you make the worst or the silliest mistakes, the better it is. Because, you know, when you're 22, when I was at Vassar, I was the only person who finished a novel during that thesis program. People had written quite a bit, and then, you know, thesis instructor was like, you were the only one who finished a novel. And they're like, why? And I was like, well, because I've been writing bad novels for now 6-7 years, right? So like, what's one more, you know? And I actually was able to finish. And I think being successful as a writer, artist, is not all about being creative and having wonderful talent. It's being able to just finish it and put yourself out there. And I look at all those people, talented people I was around, and every one situation, why did I get published and they didn't, is because I just had that closing thing of, okay, I'll put it out there, nothing to lose. Okay, let's submit it here. That was it, not because that I was a better writer than them. So if that experience has taught me anything, it's just to, you know, tell students to go for it, you know, and see what happens. There's nothing to lose.
Fantastic. This may be a little bit part of that question, but a question from the audience: what gave you the courage to help you finish the novel?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you know, it's really hard to finish. You're right. I think especially this novel is quite has a lot of racial themes you want to get right. There's a lot of pieces. So one was having tried it before, and the worst thing that happened in my mind was like, you can write a bad novel, okay, but it's not like being in an ICU bed, right? You know, or managing a frontline health situation. So it's not the best motivation for everyone, but I always go, the worst thing that can happen is I can write a bad novel, and someone can give me some feedback that I don't like, and I sit with that. I'm like, well, if that's the worst case scenario, that's a pretty good scenario, because that work doesn't determine who I am. And so I think having that mindset, I always think worst case scenario is I get bad feedback. Okay. I think was a piece, and also practicing finishing. So I think getting into the practice of finishing something is really important, because then you've proved yourself that you can finish something. So even if it's small, like you finish a 10-page story, or even if you finish a page, practice finishing small things, and then you get the sense of, oh, actually, I know how to finish things. Because a lot of times people, it's not that they're bad at finishing things, they think they can't. It's okay to finish something, not make a terrible ending. You can always go back and fix it, but just, you know, push yourself over the edge, because the worst case scenario is not so bad. Yeah.
Thank you. What advice would you give to aspiring authors when it comes to the topics you choose and the motivation you must find?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about that motivation, right? Like, you know, making the mistakes early, and I think envisioning what you want to create and using that, you know, if I could create this, what would it feel like, you know? Instead of, oh, I must write every day, come from a place of, what would it feel like to create something that I'm proud of? Use positive motivation. It's really hard in the school day to find time to write. So I remember when I was in grade 10, it was really like hard if you're doing extracurriculars, which I did, and then, you know, had a pretty, I think I had 10 or 11 subjects. So, you know, you have to be conscious of that. But I think also sectioning up like 2 hours on the weekend and say, 2 hours of the weekend, I'm going to do this. Instead of saying I must achieve this, that helps me, because then I sat in front of 2 hours and I would write, and whatever came out, you know? So those kind of practices really helped. Topics, it's really interesting, because when I was at Crawford, I would write everything set in New York and London. And when I was at Crawford, I had never been to New York before. So why was I setting these exotic stories elsewhere? It's kind of interesting. It took me to be in New York to write something set in South Africa. So, you know, I don't want to be prescriptive about subjects, but I think sometimes the subject that's made for you is maybe closer than you think. But also sometimes you'll write the most bizarre idea. And I think, you know, the drama department, the history department, the English department, you know, it's a pretty creative teachers. And so, you know, try something, maybe it'll be the worst topic ever, but you'll learn something from it. So I've written I've written like spy stuff. I've written fantasy stuff. I've written like surrealist stuff. I've written like plays and scripts just for fun. And that all of that has never been wasted. I wrote a serial killer piece once, like, but none of that has been wasted, because even though I've written something very grounded in our history, all of those, the muscle to be able to do different things, to be drama, do a Greek tragedy and then do a British Oscar Wilde play. I think that versatility makes you stronger at whatever you choose to do. So I would say with the topics, especially when you're early, try as many. And if you produce something terrible, that's fine. You go, okay, that was terrible. Okay, that's hilarious. Laugh at your own writing, move to the next one. But explore, but then also be okay with something really close to home. The life you're experiencing right now, growing up in Johannesburg, is so rich. It's so vibrant, and it took me distance to be able to pull it out and really understand what I was exposed to. I live in Vancouver. Canada's meant to be multicultural, but the most diverse experience I've had with people from different cultures and backgrounds has been in South Africa and been at Crawford. It's very funny when I walk around and people start talking to me about Jewish culture, for example, and I'm like, actually, I went to a Jewish school. My best friend is Jewish, or they go blah 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 blah, and I'm like, actually, and it's like I'm teaching them a little bit, because they don't realize what we are exposed to at Crawford, but also in Johannesburg, is amazing. It's very few times in the rest of the world you're going to experience something like that.
Okay, so Anonymous is not sure she's allowed to, or he's allowed to ask this, but how long did it take you to finish your novel?
You're totally allowed to ask it. So the idea I had, I think I was visiting South Africa during university, and I was in the CBD, and I was looking down, and we'd just gone through the tour in Soweto, and I was looking down, and I saw this picture of a sax player, and suddenly, I think it was 2011, 2012, this character, Zanele, just popped in my head, like the tone of who she was and that she's bad at singing. And I'm walking around with this idea since 2011, 12, and I didn't know what to do with it. And then I wrote a short story, and then I let it alone, and Zanele appeared in that one. And then I really started writing this novel with just Zanele in it in 2013, 2012, 2013. So I published in 2016. I had the first draft out in 2014. So 2 years to get to the draft, and then 2 more years to get published, which is very short, people say. But the idea of her, this character, has been sitting with me for longer than that, and I didn't know what to do with her. And it took me absurdly long to realize the story was set in the Soweto Uprising. I don't know why. I went around it circuitously. I produced all the characters, and I was like, oh, this is set in. And people don't believe that, because they're like, it's so much about Soweto Uprising. I'm like, you think so? But it took me a while to realize that.
How did you handle the amount of work that came with all the subjects you chose in grade 10 and 11 and 12?
Oh my gosh, it was so much. And my brother and I were talking about it, because my brother also went to Crawford. It's like, only in Crawford, I remember we did 3-hour exams. Like, 3-hour exams are intense. But you know what? It really prepared me for college, because then I was like, 3-hour exam, huh? 2-hour exam, this is a joke. How did I manage it? I think, as you get older, you get more appreciative of your parents. I think my parents were very focused on, you can take all the subjects, but up till a very late age, it'd be like 5 p.m., 6 p.m, kicking you out of the house. Go figure out something to do, which is not work. So I think having times of the day where we just weren't allowed to do homework, or just were encouraged to do something else, not homework, was really important, actually, for balance. It was a lot of workload. I remember grade 12 was really hard, because I was also applying to American schools and doing an SAT. I think grade 9 taught me a lot about time management, because we had all that project year, and I actually wasn't coping well. So I think focused between grade 10 and 11, you had to become really strategic. So every day you had to think about what's the subject I need the most work on, and how am I going to do it? So I became much better at plotting through how I needed to learn, because everyone has their own study skills, instead of sitting with a highlighter and highlighting all the notes. For me, that doesn't work. I can highlight, I get distracted by the pretty colors, but it doesn't actually help me study. So I actually would before I started studying, I'd think about, or a test or something, I'd go, what's the thing I'm weakest at? Or what's the thing that's most important in this test that will help me pass? Let's focus on that, and then focus on the next. And so you become smart about studying, which again is a really handy skill. But the workload was a lot, especially with cycle tests, and yeah, I think I had 10 subjects or something, or maybe more, and it was stressful. So, you know, it wasn't like you're cruising through, but I think in retrospect, I had a pretty balanced high school career because I had extracurriculars like drama. Even if I was in finals, I had to go and do a play. So you had to show up and do a play. You couldn't just sit in front of your books all day and study chemistry. So I think taking a variety forces you to break out of a certain mold, but getting smart about studying, I think, is really important. And I think there were some study skills courses at Crawford. I don't know what it is now, but I think figuring out your own way of being really smart of what are the core points in this subject. From grade 10 onwards, I don't think I could have survived if I couldn't summarize the entire curriculum in 2 to 3 pages. So I really practiced doing that, because otherwise it's quite a lot. And I think the point of that curriculum, as Burkers can correct me, and IAB is slightly different, is the point that you need to think through what are the big concepts and how do you conceptually think through things versus rote memorization. So yeah, that workload is a lot. Figure out a way to focus on the important pieces, because otherwise it's just too much. You can't be a perfectionist. I know it's tempting, but you can't.
Do you think that writing young and experiencing that gives you the ability to help shape you into a more mature author, if that makes sense?
Totally, I think. You know, I think it's a little bit, everyone said as a young author, it's kind of interesting because the first piece you put out isn't, you know, now I've published it. I started writing in 2013, so almost 8, 9, 10 years ago. So I'm a different person than the person who wrote that. So sometimes it's a bit hard because you have to reconcile what people think of you and what you've written, and you've already evolved 10 years. But absolutely, I think the experience of putting your work out there younger age, I think is now I've got this amazing foundation, because honestly, when you've been published, you get out. The biggest thing has been being open to the writing community. So now I have friends who are even much more successful authors who've taught me a lot about seeing the world, and the community and the relationships I have because of being a writer so early has just been phenomenal. And yeah, my maturity is much better, because now, when I was 16 and I started writing, I was determined that because I became a writer, I'd become famous. It's true, the one time I was in the Cape Town airport, someone recognized me when I was looking really terrible and took a picture with me. It did happen once, but let me tell you, being a writer, unless you like J.K. Rowling, doesn't make you famous. So now I approach writing with a much more genuine love of the craft, without thinking, you know, I'm going to be haunted by paparazzi, nor do I want to be haunted by the paparazzi. So absolutely, I feel so grateful that I went through that a few years ago.
If we see you in the airport, we'll recognize you, and we'll have a photograph with you too.
I'll be so excited if that happens. I'll be like, 1 year, one moment of fame in every couple of years. I'll take it.
And then our final question. I would love to be a writer, but I fear that I would struggle to make it. So do you think it's beneficial to focus on my sciences and have my writing on the side?
You know, I thought so too. I think, you know, right now, you don't have to make that choice. And you don't know if you're good enough to make it or not. So let me tell you, when I was at Crawford and I was writing, and when I was in university and I was writing, I was not the best writer. And often, you know, and you know this class, Miss Focus, but like I had Drew, Lisa, Nani, all these incredible, you know, writing. Danny, like, just wrote beautifully. And what I learned from them, like, you know, my 2 very close friends, Ginger and Danny, they would do the sciences and then they would do the writing as well. So I think your question is, it's interesting because it's not about doing everything and then being stressed. Do the sciences if it's interesting to you, but maybe it's 2 hours a week and you let yourself play with the writing, and don't put pressure on yourself, because right now, I'm not trying to sound like talking down to you, but I thought because I wasn't the best, I wasn't getting the best marks. I was getting top 5 marks, but you don't know if you're good or not. I mean, people are at 30 or 40 realizing they want to be writers and they don't have the amazing education you have, and they're making it. So I think you don't know yet. And even if you find this amazing way of articulating yourself in your, you know, little bit of time you give to yourself, it'll be well spent. So I suggest create space for you to write. Don't think about whether you're good or not yet. If you do it for a year and you spend 1,000 hours writing, then start looking at what you're writing and if it's improving. Not that if it's good, but is it improving? But right now, don't decide that. And I think, I don't know your entire story, but say do both, because I did science till grade 12, and I said, got through past a few C's, and I am glad I did science, and it was a bit stressful, but I didn't let go of the writing, and I'm so glad I didn't. So if you can, create space for both.
Awesome. And then we got another question. Do you think it's beneficial to enter small competitions to get the experience of rejection or success?
Yes, all the competitions. Actually, one of my most amazing memories is I did the English Olympiad, and I hate those tests. I was like, I hate the sound of the Olympiad, sounds horrible. And I was sleepy, and I did this very quirky essay, and I got into the English Olympiad, and they took me to Grahamstown. Incredible experience. So put yourself out there. You don't know what's going to happen. Absolutely. And you'll get so much feedback. So yes.
Awesome. And here's not a question, but a comment, and it comes from Mr. McMahon, who you mentioned earlier on in your speech, in your talk. A comment to you. Arushi, lovely to hear you. You are so talented and a true original. Best wishes for you for the future.
Well, thank you, Mr. McMahon. I think you read my book now, right? I sent an early batch to you, but thank you for what you gave to me in history. It was very influential in writing this book. So thank you again. And I think Mr. McMahon's mentioned in the book, so in the acknowledgements. So thanks, Mr. McMahon. Nice to see you there.
Okay, that is absolutely wonderful. Arushi, it's been a great pleasure. I didn't think that we could spend an hour talking to one person. Often we have a whole panel of people, but I have been riveted. And I suppose as a scientist myself, I've always been in great awe and admiration of writers and creators and people with the ability to transport others into an unknown world. And so I have so thoroughly enjoyed our chat here this evening. Thank you so much for giving up your time. I know your life is busy, but it's just been fantastic to touch base, catch up, and we are so proud of you, a true Crawfordian. And we hope that you have touched the lives of some of the attendees, affected their future careers, and perhaps ignited a spark if they have a love of writing and what to do with that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was such a delight to see you all. Reminds me of home, and to see everyone looking well. And I didn't get to see the audience, but thank you so much for listening. And if you have any follow-up questions, I think my email is available on my website. And just good luck, and give yourself the chance to be who you need to be.
Fantastic. Okay, good night, everybody. The great thing about webinars is there's no traveling. Have a wonderful evening, and I look forward to seeing our students on campus all tomorrow. And thank you so much for your time, to Ms. Davison, Ms. Tekna Ullman, and especially Urushi, to you.